You didn't arrive here by accident. Something subtle but undeniable has been moving within you, leading you to this very moment, not with noise or spectacle, not with bright signs demanding your attention, but with a quiet pull that you may not even have noticed until now. It feels almost like a whisper you've carried for years, a gentle nudge from somewhere deeper than your mind, guiding you toward a truth you've been ready to hear. Transformation rarely announces itself in thunder or fireworks. It often begins in silence, in the still space between thoughts, in the restlessness you feel when the life you've been living no longer fits, in the quiet recognition that what once defined you no longer holds the same weight. This is not a coincidence. It is the invitation of your inner self, reminding you that the path ahead is not about becoming someone new, but about remembering what has always been hidden inside you, waiting for the right moment to surface. When you sense that calling, however faint, it is the first sign that you are standing at the threshold of change. A change that doesn't demand you to prove anything to anyone, but simply asks you to listen, to pay attention to what is already alive within your soul. True change does not erupt with drama or demand that the world notice. It does not come dressed in bold declarations or grand gestures. Instead, it unfolds quietly, almost invisibly, like the slow shifting of seasons. You don't wake up one day with a brand new identity. You begin to notice, softly, that what once felt natural no longer feels like home. The conversations that used to excite you fall flat. The spaces that once defined you now feel foreign, and the roles you worked so hard to maintain no longer carry meaning. This transformation is not about reinventing yourself into something unrecognizable. It is about peeling away what was never truly yours to carry the borrowed masks, the expectations, the layers of identity built out of survival. What falls away is not wasted. It simply reveals the essence that was always there. Change whispers rather than shouts. And in that whisper, you begin to realize you are not becoming someone else. You are slowly returning to the one you've always been, beneath the noise. There comes a moment when you feel an almost imperceptible shift, as if you've awakened from a long dream and can no longer recognize the person you once clung to, the identity that shaped so many of your choices, the roles you wore like second skin, suddenly feel foreign. You notice that the circles you once belonged to no longer resonate. The conversations that once absorbed you now sound hollow, and even parts of yourself you thought were permanent begin to loosen their grip. This is not about rejection or erasure. It is about remembering what was always at the heart of you, something unchanging, something steady beneath every mask and every story. It's the recognition that the truest parts of you have never been lost, only buried under layers of what life demanded you become. When those layers start to fall away, you realize you are not leaving yourself behind at all. You are finally making your way back. Carl Jung reminded us that genuine growth is never about polishing or perfecting the surface of our personality. The personality is, in many ways, a useful mask, but it was never meant to be the essence of who we are. When we cling to it, we confuse the armor for the soul. Real transformation happens when we loosen our grip on that armor, when we allow the illusion of control and image to fall away, and we dare to stand in the raw truth of our being. This kind of transcendence does not require us to add more layers, but to release them, It is the slow but certain act of letting go of what is non-essential beliefs we inherited but never questioned, defenses we built to survive but no longer need, labels that once gave us comfort but now confine us. What remains is not emptiness, but clarity, a deeper alignment with the quiet essence that has always been within us. To grow spiritually is not to construct a better mask. It is to remember the soul that existed before the mask was ever needed. One of the clearest signs that something within you has shifted is the way you begin to relate to your own story. What once felt like the very center of your identity now appears distant, almost like watching an old film of yourself. You can still see it. You may even remember the feelings, but it no longer defines who you are in this moment. There is no urge to erase it, nor is there nostalgia that pulls you back into it. Instead, there is calm recognition. You can look at your past without needing to explain it to others, without defending it, without using it as a badge of either suffering or achievement. It becomes a chapter in the larger book of your life, significant but not absolute. Your worth is no longer tied to what happened, whether it was triumph or pain. Those experiences shaped you, but they do not measure you. In the space where guilt, pride, or justification once lived, something lighter begins to emerge, a freedom born from integration. You begin to understand that your past deserves acknowledgement, but it does not deserve to dictate your present. Emotional distance, when it arises from true healing, is not coldness or disconnection. It is the quiet maturity that comes from integrating your experiences rather than being ruled by them. You no longer need others to validate the pain you went through, nor do you carry the same urgency to explain what made you who you are. There is a deep knowing inside you that doesn't require words, and your silence itself becomes a form of respect for the path you've walked. The triggers that once set fire to your emotions now pass through you without leaving scars. Words that are used to cut deeply dissolve before they can settle. Relationships that once bound you to outdated versions of yourself lose their hold, not because you reject them, but because there is nothing left in you for them to cling to. Integration does not mean forgetting or denying. It means accepting every part of your journey and weaving it into wholeness, so that what once wounded you no longer defines you. As you step further into this new awareness, your emotions no longer dictate your every move, and you begin to notice a subtle but powerful shift. Instead of being swept away by old patterns, you pause, breathe, and discern. You can feel the difference between a response born in the present and a reflex that belongs to an old wound. That awareness alone creates space to choose, space to act with clarity instead of compulsion. The inner dialogue that once circled endlessly, seeking redemption, punishing yourself for past mistakes, or replaying old survival scripts, loses its grip. You don't carry the same hunger for justification, nor the same need to prove that you've overcome. Instead, you see your past as necessary steps on the path that brought you here. The story is still there, but the weight of it has dissolved. What remains is a calm confidence that you can observe, decide, and move forward without being chained to the echoes of yesterday. When the old self no longer serves as the foundation for your choices, you begin to experience a new kind of freedom. Decisions rise not out of fear, not from a need to maintain a familiar identity, but from a place that feels clearer and more aligned with who you really are. Those phrases you once repeated to yourself, "This is just who I am, or I'll never change," start to fade. Not because you've fought against them, but because they simply don't make sense anymore. You no longer move through life trying to defend an image or prove your worth. The soul doesn't require labels to feel alive. It only asks for authenticity. Transcendence is not about destroying the person you once were. It's about honoring what that self endured, then gently releasing what no longer carries life within it. In that release, you find yourself choosing differently, choosing not from the story of who you used to be, but from the deeper truth of who you are becoming. There comes a moment when the mask you once wore, the persona carefully shaped to protect you, no longer feels necessary. You realize you don't need to keep rehearsing the same emotional patterns or adjusting yourself to fit spaces that can no longer hold your truth. The letting go doesn't come with struggle or force. It comes with gentleness, as if a weight has quietly lifted from your shoulders. To transcend your former self is not to destroy it, but to honor the role it played in your survival. That version of you once kept you safe, helped you endure, and gave you a way to belong. But now, you can release it without resistance. This soft surrender is the clearest sign that you are no longer vibrating from the conditioned self. You are beginning to live from your true essence, the self that does not need to defend, prove, or justify, simply to be. As your inner world shifts, the way you connect with others begins to change as well. It is not something you plan or force, it unfolds naturally. Where once you may have sought rescue, recognition, or reassurance from those around you, you now carry what you used to search for within. You no longer look for someone else to complete you, nor do you bargain with your presence in fear of being left alone. This change allows you to meet people with greater honesty and ease. Relationships are no longer built on hidden contracts of pain or unspoken exchanges of need. Instead, they grow from clarity, from a place where you can breathe, pause, and witness without absorbing everything into yourself. You begin to realize that true connection is not about filling emptiness, it is about sharing the fullness that already exists inside you. In the past, your relationships often acted like mirrors, reflecting the wounds you carried and the emptiness you longed to fill. But as you move into a new state of being, that dynamic begins to dissolve. You no longer seek others to confirm your worth or to soothe the fears you've already faced within yourself. Instead, the connections you create now emerge from resonance, not lack from alignment, not desperation. Love itself becomes quieter, deeper, and more authentic. It no longer screams for validation or performs to prove its existence. It is steady, rooted, and peaceful. Your giving no longer comes from emptiness but from balance, and this balance transforms every bond. What once felt heavy with need now feels light with honesty. Relationships stop being reminders of what you lack and become reflections of the wholeness you already embody. A profound shift occurs when solitude no longer feels like a punishment but like a sanctuary. You stop chasing noise to avoid silence, and you stop mistaking intensity for truth or drama for depth. Being with yourself no longer feels like abandonment, it feels like alignment. You begin to recognize that the company of someone who cannot meet you authentically can feel lonelier than being alone. From this realization grows a new sense of freedom. Your emotional stability is no longer tethered to another person's presence or absence. You no longer beg for someone to stay, nor do you collapse when they leave. Instead, you place your peace where it belongs, within your own hands. Relationships that remain are those that resonate with this new center. What dissolves does so gently, without resentment, because you've learned that clarity is not rejection, it is truth. As you move through the remnants of your old self, clarity rises in places where confusion once lived. You no longer chase after mirrors that only reflect your insecurities, nor do you seek half-hearted presences to fill the spaces inside you. You understand now that a true connection does not consume you, but one that expands you. It doesn't ask you to betray your essence for the sake of belonging. Instead, it invites you to live more fully in who you already are. This realization shifts the very foundation of your relationships. Boundaries emerge not as walls of fear, but as expressions of love for yourself and for those around you. These boundaries do not divide, they create order, protecting your time, your energy, and your peace. You no longer drain yourself to sustain connections that refuse to grow, and you no longer apologize for evolving beyond what no longer fits. What remains is proof that your soul has taken the lead, choosing only what nourishes and uplifts. From this new foundation, companionship takes on a deeper meaning. You no longer look to others to provide shelter because you've become your own safe space. This isn't isolation, it is maturity at the level of the soul. You stop carrying emotions that were never yours to bear. Stop absorbing pain that others refuse to transform, and release the old habit of trying to heal those who have not chosen healing for themselves. Love is no longer disguised as sacrifice. It is presence without pressure, connection without chains. And in this quiet, clean exchange, something powerful unfolds. You become a living mirror of transformation. Not because you set out to lead or fix, but because your coherence naturally reveals truths in others they've long avoided. Some will welcome this, others may resist, but either way you remain grounded because your love no longer comes from duty or fear. It flows from the freedom of being authentically yourself. Real intimacy no longer depends on retelling every wound or proving how far you've come. Instead, it reveals itself in the simple act of being fully seen as you are right now, without decoration, without disguise. You discover that your worth is no longer rooted in how others perceive you, but in the relationship you've built with yourself. That relationship, forged in silence, in nights where you refuse to fall back into old patterns, becomes the steady ground beneath you. Your past self gently steps aside, not because you've rejected it, but because it no longer matches your current vibration. You can look back with compassion, honoring that version of you for doing the best it could with what it knew. But now survival has given way to creation. You no longer strive to be accepted or to earn belonging. You simply allow your essence to radiate naturally. And in that authenticity, a new kind of closeness becomes possible, one that is not built on need, but on truth. From this new center, love no longer feels like a burden you must carry or a chain you must hold on to. Instead, it becomes a quiet support, present but not invasive, steady but never suffocating. Relationships that remain in your life are not there out of habit, fear, or obligation. They stay because they truly align with who you are now. Choosing someone is no longer about clinging or trying to fill an emptiness. It is about honoring what resonates with your essence in this moment. Sharing yourself with another comes from fullness, not lack. And companionship transforms into a celebration of authenticity rather than a desperate search for completion. In this space, every bond feels lighter, clearer, and rooted in truth. Because the choices you make are no longer driven by urgency or fear, they are guided by alignment. As your perspective expands, what once looked unfair or unbearable begins to reveal its hidden purpose. Situations you once labeled as mistakes now appear as necessary thresholds, moments that carried lessons too profound to see at the time. You stop speaking to yourself as a victim and start recognizing that even your most painful chapters were part of a greater design, shaping the person you've become. This elevated view doesn't come from the intellect, it comes from the soul. With it, you begin to live at a different rhythm, one guided not by external pressure but by inner maturity. You stop rushing to fix, explain, or demand clarity. Instead, you learn to trust the unfolding, even when you don't yet understand every step. Your choices are no longer reactions to fear or echoes of old wounds. They become quiet acts of honoring your present truth. From this higher vantage point, life stops being a series of random struggles and begins to feel like a woven tapestry, every thread essential to the whole. With this inner elevation comes a different kind of strength, one that doesn't need to be displayed or defended. You no longer feel compelled to prove your growth, to broadcast your healing, or to convince anyone of who you've become. Instead, your power refines itself into quiet presence. What once would have drained you with the effort of explanation now speaks for itself through your calm, your steadiness, and the way you carry yourself. This softness is not weakness. It is the strength that comes when you are no longer ruled by urgency or the need for recognition. It is a strength that is rooted, unwavering, and profoundly real. Even the smallest gestures, pauses, silences, the calm of your breath take on a new weight. Growth is no longer measured by how loudly you can prove it, but by the serenity you feel when you're alone, and by the peace that hums within you no matter what unfolds outside. You begin to discover a peace that no longer rises and falls with your circumstances. It doesn't depend on whether life goes according to plan or whether others approve of your path. This peace is anchored in your fidelity to your inner truth, a loyalty that becomes non-negotiable. It is the center you return to, no matter how the world shifts around you. Challenges, or once seen as punishments or obstacles, now reveal themselves as gateways, thresholds that awaken parts of you that would otherwise remain dormant. You stop running from them, recognizing instead that they are not here to break you but to reveal you. With this understanding, your energy changes at its very core. Fear and doubt lose their grip. And what radiates outward is a quiet authenticity, a truth that requires no defense. The deepest transformation is not about rearranging your outer world, but about awakening to a steadiness within that no storm can shake. From this deeper steadiness, your perception of life transforms. The ordinary begins to feel sacred, not because the world outside has changed, but because the lens through which you see it has softened and expanded. What once seemed meaningless now carries quiet beauty. What once demanded answers now invites trust. Gratitude starts to flow naturally, not as a forced practice, but as the way your soul responds when it no longer measures everything against what is missing. You no longer need certainty before you take a step forward, nor do you demand constant signs to reassure you that you are on the right path. Instead, you permit yourself to move with life's rhythm, to let the mystery reveal itself in its own time. You stop resisting what you don't understand and start embracing the pause, the silence, the spaces in between. In that trust, alignment emerges not from doing more, but from struggling less. And in this release, your energy becomes magnetic, quietly drawing toward you the people and experiences that match who you've become. As you step further into alignment, urgency loosens its hold. You no longer move through life chasing, grasping, or forcing meaning out of every experience. Instead, you begin to meet each moment with presence. You understand that not everything needs to be solved immediately, and not every path requires certainty before you walk it. This way of being doesn't make life slower, it makes it deeper. The rush to prove yourself fades, replaced by the steady rhythm of authenticity. You notice how your energy no longer scatters in 1,000 directions but gathers into something focused and calm. You stop existing for the sake of maintaining an image and start expressing an essence that has been there all along. In this state, your very presence carries weight, not because it demands attention, but because it is real, grounded, and true. There comes a point when honesty becomes more important than habit. You stop choosing the familiar just because it feels safe, and you begin choosing what resonates with your soul, even when it asks for courage. The version of you that once controlled every move slowly loses its power, making space for someone calmer, more grounded, more authentically you than ever before. From this place, life is no longer a race to prove or to please. It becomes a sacred unfolding moment by moment, choice by choice. Your presence itself becomes a quiet medicine, touching those around you without effort, without performance. You no longer chase acceptance because you've remembered your own worth, and you no longer beg for belonging because you've come home to yourself. In this embodiment of truth, you begin a new chapter, one guided not by reaction, but by presence, not by fear, but by essence. Carl Jung once revealed a truth that few dare to embrace. Enlightenment does not come from imagining light, but from making the darkness conscious. To face your shadow is not to destroy it, but to finally turn toward it with open eyes. The memories, the wounds, the patterns you once avoided become the very doorway to your deepest wisdom. Pain becomes a teacher, fear becomes a compass, and what once felt like chaos begins to form a hidden order. This act of meeting your shadow requires immense courage. Most people spend a lifetime running from the dark corners of their mind, but you have chosen differently. By daring to see what you once denied, you transform the shadow from a burden into a bridge that leads you closer to wholeness. And in that acceptance, you realize that the parts of you once called broken were never your enemy. They were waiting, silently, for your recognition, for your love. As you walk this inner path, you come to see that you are not walking it alone. There are countless others, scattered across places and generations, who are also choosing to step out of illusion and into authenticity. This recognition creates a sense of belonging that has nothing to do with approval or performance. It is a shared remembering, a collective awakening. Together, we are discovering that wholeness matters more than perfection, that presence carries more power than performance, and that choosing truth over comfort is the real act of courage. Your individual journey is sacred, but it also echoes outward, rippling into the lives of those who are ready to listen to their own quiet call. To know this is to know that you are part of something far greater than yourself, an unfolding movement of souls returning to what is most real. If these words have stirred something inside you, it is not by accident. It is your soul reminding you of what you already carry, calling you back to yourself. This space exists for that very reason, for those who are ready to walk a path of depth, healing, and inner clarity. Here, each reflection, each story, each moment is shared to support your journey and remind you that you are never alone. If you feel aligned with this message, I invite you to stay close. Subscribe not just to a channel, but to a movement of consciousness, one where every step inward echoes outward, one where your presence and truth ripple into the world in ways you may never fully see. And if this touched you, let us know in the comments. Share what resonated most, because your voice may be the very spark someone else needs. Thank you for spending this time here. Your support is the heartbeat that allows these messages to keep flowing, and it is what inspires the creation of every new video that follows. Until we meet again, may you continue to walk gently toward your own wholeness, and may you remember that the light you seek has always lived within you.